Think about your life in the context of a courtroom setting. For those of you out there that have experienced this is the embodiment, quite possibly, of a nightmare. Your whole life, details that were hidden for so long, suddenly are brought to light. Uncomfortable questions, pressing questions, all in front of your peers and those that you know nothing about until that moment, that are also gathered in that room. Strangers alike, hearing, in some cases, some of the most intimate details of your life, or some situation or some event in your life. It's with this backdrop, it's in this kind of a setting that we should think about our life as it relates to grace that's been given to us by our God. It's in this setting, if you could just imagine for a moment, in the back, in these benches, you would see friends and family gathered, complete strangers gathered, all to hear about your life. Of course, seated in the front, just behind me, is the judgment seat, our God presiding over your life and the trial that's been brought to bear about your life. And of course, you're seated over here to the witness stand. And of course, never to forget the other players in this courtroom drama. Of course, you have all of those that have been assembled, culture and society, those folks that we've lifted up, that we've given control and power to, that may be in our lives, that we allow to judge us over here. This is those that are gathered in a panel of power and prestige, those that are gathered with influence over our lives. They make judgments of every aspect of all of the evidence that is brought forward about our lives. They are the jurors in our culture, in our society, and in your life. And of course, then we have those that represent, and those that defend, and those that are prosecuting the trial against us. We have one attorney who is known as the accuser. He is the one that's going to make the case against you. And then, of course, we have our defender, the one and the only, our Savior, our friend, Jesus, there to represent us as well. If you can imagine in this drama, and maybe you can relate to this as it plays out and unfolds in your life, there you are seated almost helplessly as the accuser paces back and forth, gaining the interest and gaining the trust of all those in the jury box as he lays out the case so eloquently and so beautifully of all of the ways in which you are found guilty. All of the things that you tried to hide in your life, he has unearthed systematically, bringing to the surface the greatest moments of your life of guilt and shame. The jury box is heartily agreeing and more buying into each and every line. In fact, they almost seem to enjoy it. The people that have gathered in the back are actually ashamed and embarrassed that this was actually your life. They thought you were somebody completely different altogether. And of course, the judge seated behind me, the look on his face, his standard is, well, it's absolute righteousness, perfection, uncompromising perfection. The accuser makes his case, and it's looking more and more that there's no chance of you ever walking free. But your representative, Jesus, stands up, and he asks for just a moment to speak to the judge. And there's some whispering and there's some speaking going back and forth, and there's this dialogue that seems to happen. And the last words that are spoken by Jesus, barely audible to the entire room, "It is finished." In that moment, the judge allows the room to hear the decision that's being made, that in this moment, that the attorney, the one that represents you, named Jesus, is actually going to take the full brunt of the punishment that was meant for you. At the dismay of the prosecutor, of the prosecuting attorney, at the anger and the fury as his case is beginning to fall apart, because it's becoming obvious to him that this exchange that went on between Jesus and his Father, the perfect judge, suddenly is falling apart. The people here are confused in the jury box. Those that are in the back, they're starting to find maybe a new breath of life, that maybe things can turn around in your life. And it becomes obvious that Jesus is actually going to take the guilty plea. He receives the sentence before your friends and your family. He receives this sentence in front of the jurors and Satan himself. He takes the punishment that was meant for you. And not only does he take that punishment, he does so willingly. He gives you something that you did not deserve: life, freedom, and a second chance. As the bailiff comes over and places handcuffs on Jesus and begins to walk him out of the room, Jesus looks over his shoulder and simply says, "I want you to live in freedom. I want you to have life, and have life to the fullest." This is grace. And life lived out in grace is about a response to what Jesus first did. Jesus doesn't do this profound action for you and for me based on what we first do or do not do in our lives. It's while we were still yet sinners, while we were still guilty, Jesus takes our place. The life of the Christian is not about behavior modification so that Jesus will do this profound act of sacrifice on our behalf. No, Jesus does this profound act of sacrifice and calls us to then live in the freedom that he has first given us. This is grace. This is life to the fullest, as Jesus intended for you and for me.